questioning is perhaps the greatest gift we have as human beings.
Science is more than a body of knowledge. It's a way of thinking.
It's a way of thinking that teaches us to question everything we think we know.
Science came about by developing techniques, methodologies for gaining reliable knowledge about the world.
We have at our fingertips the technologies that were only possible for the largest governments and corporations 20 years ago as an individual today.
If the human civilization continued at anything remotely like the current pace of technology advancement for 1 million years, where would we be? I think we're either extinct or on a lot of planets.
The good thing about science is that it's true whether or not you believe in it.
We hold the scientific method in high regard because it works. If it stopped working, we'd throw it out.
Discover the past.
Create the future.
This is the Here and How podcast.
Welcome to the Here and How podcast, where every week we dive deep into big ideas, exploring the past so that we can create a brighter future together. This is episode 17. Can we live forever? Steve, Rachel, what are some examples throughout history that you can think of off the top of your head of people who have tried to live forever, who have tried to cheat the Reaper?
The Al Ghuls in Batman.
Okay.
They're totally legit people with their Lazarus pit.
Steve?
Where was I going to go with this? There was a good direction. See, my first thought is that there's some animals that can, in theory, live forever because they don't age. Now, I don't know if that's true, but
we'll touch on that in a second.
I thought as much. As far as people, if you're willing to swallow the shit that is the Bible, then you have people that lived to like 900 years old. So I guess that's living a long time.
Well, I mean, aside from like religious, attempts at immortality, the earliest example that, I can think of in ancient literature is the Epic of Gilgamesh, where he sets out on a quest to gain eternal life. There was a Chinese, Gilgamesh obviously is, pure fiction. There's Qin Shi Huang. I'm probably butchering that, but he was a Chinese emperor, and he sent out 1,000 different emissaries to all parts of the region trying to find some way to live forever, some potion of eternal life.
Fountain of youth.
The irony of it is that he wound up dying by eating mercury pills to try to live forever.
He went the way of the alchemists.
Yeah, so
I have a fun story about him, though. So
okay.
He was like the first emperor of China, or like the sort of big sort of empire of China, if you want to put it like that. And like you say, he sent out these thousands of people to go and find this like magician on a mountain who he thought had this like potion or secret to eternal life. And when they couldn't find it, they were too scared to go back to him and to China. So there's kind of like a little bit of a myth or a story or a legend now that apparently they all went off on their own way and they founded what is now Japan because they were running away from him because they didn't want to go back home because they'd be killed.
Interesting.
So, yeah. Sorry for you.
I know you said to stay away from mythology, but I know in the ancient Greeks had some story in which somebody wanted, I don't know the ins and outs as you can tell, but somebody wanted their partner to live forever, and so they begged Zeus, and Zeus granted that person to live forever, but did not grant the ability for that person to stop aging. And it says that within a certain amount of time.
Tithonus.
Okay, yeah.
And he became so there's two variations of the story, but like in the first one, basically he's not granted eternal youth, just eternal life. And so it says, here's a quote from the story. It says, "But when loathsome old age pressed full upon him, and he could not move nor lift his limbs, this seemed to her in her heart the best counsel. She laid him in the room and put to the shining doors. There he babbles endlessly, and no more has strength at all, such as once he had his supple limbs." And then the other variation, he just shrinks smaller and smaller till he's the size of a cricket.
I mean, I do like the moral of the story in it, which is that age is nothing without health. And I'm sure that's something we're definitely going to dive into.
That's true.
It's true. It's like the quote, "He who has his health has 1,000 dreams. He who doesn't have his health has but one."
I like that. I was going to say, who was the woman who, she's like basically one of the biggest sort of serial killers in history. and she was like some countess, and she's like one of the people who the myth of Dracula is based on, or the story of Dracula is based on. And she would kill her like servants, and she would get people to kidnap virgins from the village, and she would bathe in their blood because she thought it would keep her youthful and healthy forever.
Elizabeth Bathory.
Yes, that's her.
Bathe in the blood of virgins.
That's a
Sounds like something that Vladimir
name.
Putin would do.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we have in history, we have the Fountain of Youth and this quest for this, eternal life. We have the Holy Grail, which apparently if you drink from, you would have eternal life. Apparently Sir Galahad found it, according to legend, and is, I guess, still alive today.
He is. He's very well known. He lives down the road from me. Good guy. Good guy.
Yeah, he can't quite understand millennials, but
yeah, he's he lives next to all the other fairy tales.
Yeah, I'm always having to fix his smartphone for him. He doesn't know what WhatsApp is. It's really awkward.
Apparently, there's also in legend there was a Jew that cursed Jesus as he was carrying the cross, and he said something, insulted Jesus or something, and he was cursed to never die until Jesus returned. And so they call him the Wandering Jew. It's just this creepy old dude that wanders around.
The size of a cricket.
So there is this notion that when you die, that there's kind of two deaths, if you will. That one is like you actually die, and then for most people, unless you've accomplished something magnificent, 75 years after your death, then that's about when you're forgotten. So most people don't remember like their great-great-grandfather. And the ancient Egyptians called this the second dying.
To me, that's the sad one.
Probably why their kings were so dead set on building gigantic pyramids, which were, the simplest structure, Steve.
Don't do this.
Wide base.
Simple principles, not simple execution.
So I want to ask you guys, what is dying of old age?
This is like a tough one, because people always say like, oh, it was natural causes or they died of old age, but there's always some underlying thing, like, they have a heart attack or a stroke or something like that, right?
Yeah, when one of my family members died from cancer, I looked up what are the leading causes, and some websites, some places would say old age, and then in brackets it would have certain things. And after a bit more research, it seemed to be the case that you can't die from old age. No one dies from old age. They die from something giving up, succumbing to disease of some sort.
Or some kind of organ failure, right?
Yeah. There's no such thing as dying of old age. Like, your body does accumulate damage over time, and it kind of loses the ability to repair itself as well. But in most cases, when people refer to dying of old age, what they're actually talking about is, usually as you get older, your cell division reaches what's called the Hayflick limit, which is your certain cells, like, they can no longer divide, and so they become senescent. They stop, they no longer function as well, or they start carrying out harmful functions, and so like they stop dividing, and it can lead to like inflammation, and you can have your immune system starts failing. This is why oftentimes like old people, even when they get vaccines, oftentimes their bodies don't respond as well to the vaccines, and they don't necessarily develop immunization. That's why when you go to get your flu shot or your flu vaccine each year, you're not just doing it for you. You're doing it to increase herd immunity so that if you are around old people who are susceptible to these diseases, who their immune systems are not as strong, then they can't necessarily get the vaccines. But like flu season and stuff is very dangerous in nursing homes.
Yeah.
Another example, there was one doctor he was talking about how in most cases he observed as people get older, you start to lose the will to eat and drink. And if you're not drinking enough water, that can lead to kidney failure because your kidneys fail without water, and this builds up toxin in your body, and it can lead to respiratory depression and eventually the failure of your vital organs like your brain and your heart.
You were saying about the cells basically as you get older get worse at what they're meant to do, and that makes them. What was the term you gave it when?
The Hayflick limit.
Yes. Okay.
Or senescence.
That's it. Senescence is what they go to.
Hayflick limit is kind of like the limit of how many times cells can divide.
Do we know the nature of that? For example, is it basically thermodynamics? Essentially, it's just after repeating, the DNA's being mutated, or you're losing some information or whatnot, and then it just ends up that it can't continue.
I actually know a little bit about this. So there's like a couple of different reasons, and two of the big main ones are DNA oxidation and DNA methylation. And one of them is where basically, I think it's the what is it? The guanine in DNA is basically oxidized, so it kind of becomes damaged, and that can lead to certain things like the cells not being able to do their jobs, not being able to replicate properly, and things like that. Methylation is where methyl groups are added to cytosine and adenine, and you know what I'm trying to say, right? Yeah, that one. Yeah. And so basically they do stop cell replication. So one of them is kind of like an internal thing in the cell, and one of them is kind of caused by the external oxygen coming in. But basically the point is that the DNA gets messed up and can't do what it's supposed to anymore. So either the cell doesn't function properly, which leads to organ failure or cancer or other diseases like that. And the other one is that the cell just can't replicate. So when that cell dies, there isn't any replacement. So you just kind of start to waste away. But there are a couple of other things as well, which Thomas is probably going to talk about.
Yeah, so there's a number of different causes. Because this is kind of a new field of research, it's really only been in the last few decades that we've started to kind of grasp a little bit better what causes aging, and there's been, a lot more breakthroughs in attempts at extending lifespans. But when we look at this, there's the main consensus is that there's damage that accumulates over time, and that your cells start losing the ability to repair themselves. They start becoming less adaptive to, recovering from this damage. But there's a couple things that cause it, or that there's a few theories as to what cause it. One of them is the shortening of the telomeres on the end of your chromosomes. So your chromosomes have these tips on the end that I don't think they actually store genetic information, but they're kind of like the caps on your shoelaces. They're the plastic tips on your shoelaces that protect it. And every time that your telomeres regenerate, they don't replicate, or every time that they replicate, they don't necessarily replicate the tips completely, and so they get shorter and shorter and shorter until that cap no longer exists, and then the cells basically become senescent. That's I'm probably doing this horrible injustice because I'm not a medical doctor, but there is a site I recommend, or I'll put a link to this in the show notes, but it's called longlife.org, and they have a list of like 7 different things believed to cause aging, and so they look at problems with DNA repair. They look at, one of them is protein folding. So your proteins have certain functions that they carry out when they are, if you stretch out all the amino acid chains, or the linear chain of amino acids, then they naturally fold into these shapes. And when they're folded into these shapes, they carry out certain vital functions in the cell. And if they unfold and they don't fold properly, then they don't carry out that function. And apparently they can start to build up, like these unfolded proteins can build up. And there's been different studies that have shown that this can lead to certain age-related diseases, particularly things like neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, among others. And so like this is another thing that, can lead to damage. There's also different mitochondrial dysfunctions. There's problems with your stem cell exhaustion. You lose your stem cells as you age, and the stem cells are used to create new cells. When you're young, when you're a child, you grow from out of the placenta, and there are pluripotent stem cells that can turn into just about every other stem cell. Well, as you get older, you have in your body, you have things like, I'm going to probably butcher the pronunciation of this, but hematopoietic stem cells. That
I know what you mean,
They can turn into things like, I think, red blood cells and lymphocytes but they can't turn into everything else. They're not like these pluripotent stem cells that can become everything. And so there's been some different research on stem cell initiatives that can, regrow organs from pluripotent stem cells and implant those into us if we have like organ failure, or, give yourself stem cell injections that can increase lifespans and stuff. But there's a lot of different causes of aging, but the general consensus is like your body starts to kind of break down and it loses the ability to repair itself.
Yeah. There's definitely like superficial things as well, or like superficial signs of this. So where your skin starts to lose elasticity, then you get wrinkles and things like that, and you can get loose skin and baggy skin and things like that. So it's not just happening on the inside, but it's the stuff we can see as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
it's like oxygen, our metabolism, even solar radiation can cause damage that builds up over time, and our body becomes less effective at repairing it. So I want to real quick make the distinction between extending our lifespan versus extending our health span. So if you could live to be 150, but you only were healthy for 70 years of that, would you?
No.
What do you mean by healthy?
So let's say that you live a vibrant, like your mind is bright and you're learning things and you're, active and you're out and you're moving around. But then like the last, 70 or 80 years of your life, you're in a nursing home, you're, kind of in and out of a comatose state. You're like a vegetable. Maybe your bones are brittle. You're stuck in a wheelchair. You might have Alzheimer's.
That is my biggest fear. Something like Alzheimer's and like losing your mind. And
to add on that, a while ago I did one of these DNA tests so that I can figure out whether or not I have the gene variants for Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. And it came back that I didn't, which is obviously good news. But if it came back saying I did, I'd at least have an idea of what's happening to me as I got to, a much later age, assuming that I'm going to get there. And I would be able to figure out what's going on, and I would be able to go to Switzerland or wherever it is legal to be euthanized, because that's what I would do. So basically, if I don't have my health, I don't have my life. I might have a life by definition, but I'm not interested. But the reason I said about the definition of health is that I think that's a key component for a lot of people. I think if you ask people enough and you really dive down into what they mean by wanting to live, it is that they want to be able to live with the ability to be what they define as healthy, so that they can do what they want to do. So there's lots of people that are adrenaline junkies, and that they love being out and about, and they want to be able to walk, and they want to be able to visit places. Once that is taken away from them, that might be the point at which where they go, I don't care for living anymore, or very quickly they would go downhill. Whereas for me, it's all about the mind, really. I think I'm going to be okay until my mind is completely gone. As much as I love exercise, as much as I love getting out, I think that's the main part for me.
Yeah.
Well, that's like Stephen Hawking. He notoriously said, he's like, my body might be gone, but I still have my mind. And he was absolutely brilliant until the very end.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
Another scary thing for me is something like arthritis. Like if I couldn't use my hands, I think that would be a big issue for me, because like all my kind of big main hobbies, like using a camera, like painting, things like that, it's all stuff that I use my hands for. And I mean, like there are ways around it. Like I used to be friends with this like really lovely girl who I think I can't remember the cause of it now, but I think it was some sort of cancer as a child. And she had to have her arms amputated just below the elbow. And she was still absolutely fantastic at like using a camera. She just had to use slightly different ones that were lighter and that had like slightly easier to use settings with like lots of dials rather than buttons. So I mean, there are ways around it, but I still think like if I couldn't have my hands, I'd struggle, because all my favorite things you need them for. That sounds a bit weird, but
well, it's good that you emphasized on what she really wanted was the ability to be able to take photos, or the ability to be able to use the equipment that she wants to use, rather than she wanted the ability to use her hands. So if there are measures in where you can get around it, then you still have what you want. It's just the main source, the main way in which to normally get what you want would be cumbrous to you. You wouldn't be able to do it. But yeah, it's interesting that adds into where for you that's very important. Where for a lot of people, that's not what they're concerned about.
Yeah.
So yeah,
it did kind of change my whole way of looking at things, because it was back when I was like a part of the photography society at uni, and a lot of the time people would come to me with like asking for camera recommendations and stuff, and normally I'd just be like, oh well, this is good for this purpose and this is good for this purpose. But with her, the purpose she needed was like easy to use and lightweight, so I had to change everything, like every criteria that I'd kind of had in mind, and start looking at cameras in a very different way, less about the results they produced, and instead look at how you use them. And it was kind of like an interesting little thing. It kind of made me look at things in a different way. But very talented photographer. She was really good. She had a proper good eye for stuff.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's what you need.
Sorry, throwing that out there.
That's good.
So I wanted to ask if you guys think that we can live forever as humans. Do you think it's possible?
What, in our current state, or just with all technology possible?
Just in general, is it theoretically possible?
Yeah, I wouldn't see why it's not.
I think animals. Few things are impossible.
Yeah,
there are animals that live for hundreds of years. You think of like tortoises and stuff. There are jellyfish. There's a particular jellyfish called Turritopsis dohrnii that can actually reverse its aging process and revert back into a polyp and then grow back into a jellyfish and essentially live forever, assuming that predators don't get to it.
Yeah.
There are examples of like hibernating squirrels that have genes that can turn on during hibernation that drop your heart rate like way down to a couple minutes or a couple beats per minute.
Wow.
And drop your body temperature down to, or their body temperature down to like 40 degrees Fahrenheit. And if we could find a way to like, decrease our metabolism like that, then there's different implications for, we could potentially freeze ourselves, cryonics and stuff. There's also, if you decrease your metabolism, then this entire process that we're talking about of like your cells reproducing at a fast rate, and, maybe that could be a way of extending your life until better medical advances can make you live long without being hibernating.
Going back to what we were saying on what makes you, and I was saying that it's your consciousness. If you could move, exactly. Like if you move your consciousness into another person or into another, body, say it's grown in a lab or whatever, or even not one at all, then you do get to live forever because you are your consciousness. You are not your body, and then you get to just ignore all of this issues with how genes replicate, etc.
Steve's gonna get a brain transplant.
Right. Crazy hypothetical here, but if you could live to say like 80 or 90 or 100, and then have your like mind and your personality and all your memories transferred into a newborn baby, would you do that?
Yeah. I mean, I don't see
you
why
have
not.
to be
Give yourself
aware of
another
like,
shot.
but you're like aware of your past life as this newborn baby, and then suddenly you don't have like proper control over your limbs anymore, and you've just been this like fully functioning adult, and then suddenly you're a small child again. Wouldn't that be weird?
But imagine the knowledge that you would have, the opportunity, the capacity. You'd be laying there frustrated because you couldn't do anything. But just imagine
you reach for a cookie and your parents are like, "Don't eat that," and you're like, "Fuck you! I'm twice your age, Mom."
Yes.
It's like, I know more about quantum physics than you'll ever know.
Oh, what if like your children birth your new body, so you're like in the body of your like grandchild? Sorry.
Wow.
So
there's a movie plot, I'm sure.
If you guys are familiar with transhumanists, they're basically people who think of like what humans could potentially become, like the transformation of humanity into some like either merging with machines or augmented intelligence. And there's a transhumanist named Aubrey de Grey, and he's the founder of the SENS Foundation, which is the Strategies for Engineered Negligible Senescence. And they're attempting to, increase human lifespan. And according to him, the first immortal generation may already be alive today. And according to Ray Kurzweil, who we've talked about in the past, but basically he's the one who wrote the book Singularity is Near. I think he's like the director of engineering for Google or something, but he's made like so many predictions about the future and about the future of computing power and everything that have actually, he's at an alarmingly high accuracy rate. And he keyed the term longevity escape velocity. And according to him, within the next, 30 years or so, we're going to reach a point where human lifespans are extended by at least one year per year, and then it's going to get exponentially more than that. So if you can live that long, then it's like our breakthroughs in medical advancements are going to give us more years each year than, that we're going to get more years faster than we're aging.
Don't you think as we live longer, we're just going to uncover like more and more problems though that we didn't know about before because we weren't living that long? It's like now people say, oh, more people than ever have cancer. It's like, yeah, because we're living longer than we used to. We've kind of got more time in these bodies to develop cancer. Do you not think like we could uncover a bunch of crazy health problems that we weren't aware of before?
That's true, but part of the science behind this is that as computing power gets more and more powerful, as our tools for imaging the human body get more and more precise, and we get a better understanding of how our bodies work, and we get a better understanding of like the laws of nature, of chemistry and physics and biology, then we'll see these things before they even happen, or at least our artificial intelligence systems will, or potentially we'll have, automatically repairing nano robots inside our veins that, can go through and fix things. You start to kind of merge with machine.
So I was looking up a little bit in preparation for this episode, and it seems to be that once damage is caused, it's really quite hard to reverse it. So once someone's got cancer from, say, smoking, they're not in a good state. That's really hard to deal with. Whereas if you put your time and energy into prevention, so by having campaigns that stop people from smoking in the first place, that's the easiest, the best, and the most effective way of preventing a disease. It's by preventing it before it even becomes one. So us getting older and running into new diseases that we're not prepared for, I guess it would have to run side by side with our accumulation of more knowledge, understanding, this physiological apparatus that we're in. It'd be like an arms race, which would be quite interesting.
Yeah, I'd love to see this unfold. So there's a couple different things there's a lot of different areas of research that are going on in terms of extending human lifespan and determining what exactly it is that causes aging. And I'm going to kind of just run through these real quick for time's sake. But there was one 45-year study called the Honolulu Heart Program, where they found that in people who were living into their 90s or 100 and whatnot, they found that there was a particular configuration of the FOXO gene that was found in humans that tripled your odds of living to 100 if you had this gene or this variation of this gene.
What did it do?
These results were they were tested in populations around the world, in like Germany, Italy, Japan, the US, and they were confirmed just about everywhere. I don't know exactly what the particular gene does, but apparently it both extends your lifespan and your health span. So you live longer, healthier, which is awesome. And they found that editing the FOXO gene in C. elegans worms, that particular gene, it switched on about 100 other genes that enhanced the immune system and repaired the cells. So, and apparently it caused these worms to live twice as long, which is cool.
That's crazy.
There's a drug called rapamycin, which is used in organ transplants and to treat rare cancers. And apparently this drug increased the life expectancy of mice by 30%. But one of the downsides with this drug is it's an immunosuppressant drug. So like when you get an organ transplant, you don't want your immune system fighting the new organ. And so you take this immunosuppressant. Apparently it increased the lifespan of mice by 30%. But if you're old and you already have a bad or weakened immune system, you probably don't want to be taking immunosuppressants.
Yeah, that's not going to be good.
Scientists found that activating the protein kinase, it helped to get rid of sick and dying cells, and it led to a 30% increase in the lifespan of flies.
Wow.
A lot of these studies, they might work on flies or on mice or things. They haven't necessarily been tested on humans yet. So I wouldn't go out just, taking all kinds of drugs because, as much as our immune system is similar to mice, it's not completely identical.
Yeah, you got quite a debate around that topic, haven't you? A lot of people will throw out information because it's been done on mice, whereas some people will say it's going to basically be the same for humans since we're both mammals. Seems to me that there's somewhere in the middle where you want to meet.
We do share a massive amount of genetic similarity with mice, especially when it comes to drugs and disease and whatnot. But it's not a guaranteed thing.
It's like more than 90%, depending on how you cut it, as in DNA, which is quite a lot.
There's also a compound that slowed down aging in mice called nicotinamide mononucleotide (NMN) that activated the sirtuin protein, and apparently human testing began in 2016, but the results aren't out yet, or at least not that I find. There's a diabetes drug called metformin that increases the rate of cell oxidation and apparently increased longevity, which is interesting.
Wait, it increases oxidation, and that increases...
Yeah, I don't know how that works. But
that's a weird one.
Yeah. And then there's the UCSC Longevity Institute did experiments on yeast where there were 2 particular genes that they removed that slowed the deterioration cycle and increased the lifespan of yeast tenfold. So a lot of this is like, it's very preliminary. We're doing tests on flies and yeast and mice and stuff, but we're really kind of on the verge of human trials for a lot of these things, or we're kind of getting a better understanding of the genetics behind it. It's only been, a little over a decade now or 2 decades that we've really had an understanding of, gene sequencing, that we sequence the human genome, that we start to kind of understand what different genes do in the human body. So this is a very, very, very cutting edge new area of research.
Just quick question. Do we know if metabolism has anything to do with age? So if we look at mammals that live the longest, do they have a slow metabolism? Do they have a large one? Are they processing a lot? I only asked because I remember a while back I was discussing with someone the health benefits of being vegan or vegetarian. And so far as I knew, veganism is not as healthy as vegetarianism. And when I looked up the stats, the NHS had several studies, for example, which were showing that people that eat red meat or are vegan live 10 years less on average compared to vegetarians and pescatarians, which are people that eat fish. There wasn't anything else to it, and there could be many factors, like do people with that kind of diet exercise? But I'm wondering if if there's any links between metabolism and the way in which we use it.
I think there are links between metabolism. I think it would be extremely far-fetched to say that eating red meat decreases your life expectancy by 10 years.
No. So the study was showing that people who eat red meat regularly, in fact, it said eat red meat at all, and are vegan, do not live as long as people that live on a vegetarian diet and a pescatarian diet.
How can you be vegan and eat red meat?
No, you can't. I'm saying both of those.
Oh, either or.
Both of those. Because there was like this, you've got the dichotomy of don't eat meat, and then don't eat any products at all, and you've got different diets. Basically, there's several different diets that people practice, but 4 of the most popular seem to be almost known is an omnivore, someone that will eat basically anything. A vegetarian. Vegetarians tend to consume egg and milk, but won't eat animal products. Then you've got a pescatarian, which is egg, milk, and fish. And then you have vegan, which is, no animal products at all. And the study was just showing that the life expectancy of the people that were pescatarian and vegetarian was significantly higher than vegan and omnivores. So
I'd like to see the original study, because that sounds very like pop culture reporting.
Of course,
style.
yeah, no, I understand it. It's quite a find. I mean, it didn't go into why. There's many factors that could be why. It could be to do with lifestyle. But I'll link it to you, and then you can look at it yourself, and it will be in the description for this episode.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So one kind of cool story. There's a guy named Irving Gordon he has a car that is a 44-year-old Volvo that has 2.7 million miles on this car. And he's basically gone through and he's completely repaired the car over the course of the last 44 years, but he just keeps swapping parts out and keeps, very, very regular maintenance. It's like brand new. The car just looks absolutely phenomenal.
It's the boat. It's
what?
the boat.
Ship of Theseus?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's that, but with the car. Sorry.
It's like the car version of the ship of Theseus.
Yeah. Sorry, I know it makes no sense me just shouting, it's the boat. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, so there's this kind of idea of, well, what if we could do something similar with humans? So like as your heart starts to go out, you swap it out a new heart or something, or you swap out different parts. Now, obviously, we were talking about your genes start to break down, your telomeres start to shorten, you start to have buildups of proteins and stuff. So like it's not as easy as just like swapping out a kidney or something. But that definitely would, as you get older, maybe you have kidney failure or you have your liver fail or you have your heart fail or whatever. If you could just have these 3D printed organs that are brand new, that definitely would help for staving off these conditions and increasing life expectancy on the whole for people who die of organ failure.
I guess there could potentially be some way of us kind of generating our own stem cells as well with our own DNA. Would that be possible?
If you, I don't see why not. If you hang on to like the, I think it's like the placenta at the time of your birth.
Okay.
You can do that. And there's actually a company called Cellularity that stores a child's placenta, and it can be used to regrow child's organs from the placenta.
That's quite cool.
And so not just the umbilical cord, but like the placenta itself has the pluripotent stem cells. And the cool thing with pluripotent stem cells, or pluripotent stem cell injections, is that they aren't rejected by your immune system because there's no immunological response.
Yeah.
And apparently these injections have been shown to increase life expectancies in animals by 30 to 40% and increase the speed of self-healing, which is pretty cool.
Wow. That's cool.
As far as breakthroughs in organ transplants, because sometimes when you get an organ, it can be rejected, and lab-grown organs are they're kind of an alternative to this, that you could grow an organ from your own cells, from your own heart cells, your own blood, or not like your own body tissue. It would be 100% perfect, 100% fit all the time. So there's a transplant surgeon, Jay Viconti, and a chemist, Robert Langer, that began experimenting with engineering scaffolding materials like biorubber that your cells could grow around. So like you can't just throw a bunch of heart cells in a petri dish and expect a heart to form. You have to have kind of this scaffolding structure for it to form. And they've grown everything from, there have been human ears that were grown on rats that were then used, that were grown from a patient's own cells. There were blood vessels, skin, bladders, muscle tissue have all been built in a lab. And now there's also been hearts, lungs, kidneys, and tracheas that have been grown in labs. Like this is amazing cutting edge stuff.
Did you say muscle tissue?
Yeah.
So just building that's basically in vitro meat, would it not be?
Well,
or does it have to be built on top of a living organism, such as a mouse, or?
I don't know.
Because
I think we should do a whole episode on growing meat in laboratories, and then I'll break through in like
that'd be a tremendous breakthrough.
Yeah, because I know that there have been different burgers and stuff that have been made in a laboratory, but that's also very cutting edge. The thing is, there's about 20 Americans a day that die waiting on organ transplant lists. So if I have a bad liver and I need a transplant, there are so many people on the list now, and there's not enough organ donors, that being able to print them, do like 3D printing or something in a laboratory to create organs would save, millions of lives in the long term worldwide. It'd be a phenomenal breakthrough. Couple of other things. John Vanderson discovered that a lot of times these senescent cells build up in our body that lead to like inflammation, and killing off senescent cells in mice postpone the detrimental effects of aging. And because it got rid of all the harmful waste products and chemicals and stuff, and the inflammation causing chemicals in your body. There's a couple of companies that are doing some amazing things. So one of them is there's the Human Longevity Initiative by Craig Venter, and I think it's Peter Diamandis as well, that started the Human Longevity Inc. Mark Allen of Allevian, he's done experiments with Parabiosis, which they've been done at like Stanford and Harvard, where they'll take young blood and from animals, of like younger animals, and transfusing it into older animals. And they found that it increases lifespan. And apparently there's a protein called GDF11 that is responsible for like your fur shininess, mental acuity, increases in muscle mass, and this protein decreases with age. And so this company is working on manufacturing and testing the production of this protein for potential use in increasing life expectancy.
That's amazing.
Cool.
Yeah, really, really cool.
There's a company called Celgene by Bob Hariri that they demonstrated that the placenta, this is what I talked about before. You can take the pluripotent stem cells, and so he has a company I think called a Life Bank that'll store the placenta. There's Unity Biosciences. They remove the inflammation causing senescent cells, and they're entering human trials with that. And then there's a company called SamiMed that takes regenerative stem cells and does injections into your body. And they found that you could regrow cartilage with a single injection to your knee, that they could regrow hair in its original color and remove wrinkles.
What?
Wow, that's fascinating.
Sign me up for the removing wrinkles, please.
It doesn't surprise me about all these almost miraculous things that can occur from this, because I have friends that take anabolic steroids, and it is amazing how effective they are at what they are proposed to do. So I've seen people that have had injuries which have been with them for years, and then they've taken a certain anabolic substance and they have healed. Like, they've healed very, very quickly. So it makes sense that if we can utilize other cells and do the same, that you'd have the same result.
Yeah. There's also a company that I think it might be Human Longevity, but it might be a subset of that. But it's by Peter Diamandis, and basically they take they do this massive scan. You go in for like 3 hours, and they'll scan your genome, your I think like your entire biome and everything. They'll take like blood samples and all these tissue, all these different samples from your body, and examine all your different levels and try to look for any kind of health factors, health risk factors, any anomalies and stuff. And you go in and you do this every single year, and they can tell you if you're at risk of certain diseases, if you have a particular gene that might put you at risk, or if you have certain signs, this organ is, a little bit too big. Is it growing? Do you have these cancerous growths? Are they, carcinogenic? Are they, they'll basically look at your body and tell you if there's any abnormalities, as a way of practicing preemptive medicine. So you can tell, like, one of the fastest ways or the easiest ways to beat cancer is to find it early, to detect it before it's too late. And so they do these huge scans of your body, and they'll gather all this information and find out if there's absolutely anything wrong with you. And so I thought,
what's their names again? I want to look them up.
God, I'll put a link in the show notes.
Yeah, sure. Awesome.
It's by Peter Diamandis.
Yeah.
He's one of the founders. So there's all these different little breakthroughs in, curing or healing the human body so that this body lives longer. But assuming that this body is going to die, what are some different ways that you can live forever outside of this body?
In the hearts and minds of men.
Yeah.
YouTube.
I mean, in the Iliad, it was the Iliad or the Odyssey, where I think it was the Iliad, Odysseus chooses eternal glory over long life because he realizes he's going to die sooner or later, but he would rather, have eternal glory and live on in the hearts and minds of people after him.
Yeah, it reminds me of a great saying from, I think I got it from Troy, the film, but it is Marcus Aurelius, if I remember correctly. It's what we do in life echoes in eternity.
That's in Gladiator.
Is that Gladiator as well?
Yeah.
I mean, it's Marcus Aurelius, so it makes sense that it's used everywhere.
So there's also the idea of cloning yourself. You said, getting a new body and putting your brain in that, or just cloning an exact copy of this one. Without your brain, though, it wouldn't really be you.
Yeah.
But
I feel like even if you have a clone, it's not going to have the same experiences as you, so it's not going to end up being you. There's a whole, nature nurture
You have to
thing.
have a brain transplant.
Well, clone, I guess. It depends on how it's done. So if they was to take you and then clone you, I guess it would stand to reason that depending on how it's done, it's exactly the same as you. It is you. But
Well,
immediately
because
afterwards
when
you
we
get
talk about-
other exposures.
Yeah. When we talk about cloning, it's only an exact copy of your DNA.
Yeah, when it's defined like that, yeah, it's not you at all.
Yeah.
I'd agree with that.
So basically, they'd take your DNA and they'd put it in a little egg cell without any DNA, and then they'd grow it in a little womb, and then out would pop a little clone of you, and it would have exactly the same DNA as you and probably look very similar to you. But
it'd be like a twin. It wouldn't have your memories.
Exactly, yeah.
Something that would be interesting. I'd like to see it because we know how much of diet is an effect on how you can develop. So, for example, one of the reasons why Asians have increased in height by a hell of a lot over the last century is because their diet's changed. It's amazing how much diet has an impact on those things. So, if a version of me was cloned and it got a decent diet growing up, it would be funny if to see how much taller than me it would be.
Yeah, it'd be interesting.
That's true.
A couple other options we need to wrap up pretty quick, but as far as time goes, but one would be like bionics and transhumanism. So like if you merge your body with machines, so maybe you get like a robot heart or something, and you still have all your mind and your memories, but you start getting like these parts swapped in, these, you know, metal robotic parts.
I would do that.
Yeah?
Yeah, I'd do
and
that.
I mean, there's already people that have like pacemakers and things like that.
Yeah, that's true.
One other option is a digital upload. So if you upload your consciousness in the form of an avatar, you could scan your brain or try to take all your memories and put it in the cloud.
But isn't that just what we're doing right now as YouTubers and podcasters?
Well, you're
we're taking our essence and putting it on the internet.
You can't have a conversation though with a YouTube video. But there's examples of like Jason Lee at the University of Illinois has a project Lifelike where he's creating a digital avatar backup of himself, and it'd be kind of like Jor-El and Superman, where you talk to this cloud computed avatar version of someone who's long dead. So you could have all the people in past history that you communicate with. There's another example is Dmitry Yudkovsky has the 2045 initiative. He's kind of doing the same thing. There's several other examples, but it's basically putting your mind in the cloud. Another example is freezing your body, or cryonics, which is different from cryogenics because cryonics is like, I think when you die, you'll freeze your body like right at the time of death and try to preserve it. According to one of our listeners, Joanna Kobierska, I hope I'm not butchering the pronunciation, but she says she's a biochemistry student and weighed in on our last episode talking about how DNA has a half-life of about 521 years. So even if we get a fossilized piece of dinosaur in amber or something, we couldn't really sequence it. So this would also apply to cryonics. If you try to freeze yourself for too long and the science just isn't fast enough, well, eventually, you know, you're going to have some degradation. The nucleotides themselves will break down. So you can, you know, you can increase the half-life of your DNA by freezing it at like a super low temperature. But again, I don't know how long that would last. So, but it's just a
stupid question. Is that also true of egg and sperm cells that are frozen?
I think so, but usually you only freeze those for like a few years and not a few hundred years.
Yeah.
So
just thought it was worth asking.
So we talked about cloning, we talked about living on as glory, you know, extending human lifespans, bionics, uploading yourself as an avatar. Another thing is your genes do live on through your offspring. So, you know, it's only half of you, but it's one way that part of you lives on. You know, you share a quarter of your genetic content with your nieces and nephews. Yeah. So, you know, push the human population forward. A couple problems people put forth with living forever. Can you think of any that we might run into?
Overpopulation. There's already too many people.
Yeah.
Overpopulation. Another one is as people retire later, like if you live healthier longer, you won't need to retire at 60, and so you'll have all these experienced people to compete with. And if you're 20 just coming in and you want a job, then, you know, there might not be enough employment options for young people. And that, you know, what if you live longer but you have a worse quality of life, so you have longer lifespans but not longer health spans?
And
then
what
you would
people,
be a greater
if,
welfare burden.
Yeah, if you was to make it so that people can retire as well, you're going to end up with 80-90% of the population being retired on the shoulders of 10% working.
And this is why we have to increase health span, you know, so that you can live healthier longer is important. as far as overpopulation, one thing, why not reach out into the stars? Why not populate other planets? Why not, if you have people living longer and computing power is getting stronger, you have more smart people around with healthy minds, being able to contribute to these breakthroughs based off of a lifetime of gathered experience and information and knowledge, then I think that the rate of technological advancement will increase, and there's no reason that we can't solve problems for humanity. We live in the most abundant time in human history. Yeah. Even though populations are like 7 billion, we have more abundance and breakthroughs in agriculture, aquaculture, water desalination that have caused, people to be able to actually not just survive, but thrive with large populations.
Sorry, you go ahead.
I was going to say that one of the most exciting prospects for me about living longer is that we will have the world's greatest minds for longer, and they'll be able to develop with new advancements and to be able to really, zone in on what they're thinking. For example, if Isaac Newton, being the genius that he was, if he existed today, what would he have made of everything? How would he have worked with Einstein's general theory of relativity? Would he still be religious? I'd be interested in that question. Imagine having these great minds.
If you could get 5 different PhDs in your lifetime and you take all of these ideas and you create, a synthesis of different ideas, the possibility for that is huge.
Yeah, it could be amazing to presidency would be you need to be over the age of 250 to be considered.
A weird kind of like ethical issue that I have in mind is that like if people want themselves to live longer or live forever and want to do all these things, that's kind of fine because they're making this decision for themselves. But there would be some people who would try and apply the same methods to their pets, like their dogs or their cats or whatever.
Yeah.
And kind of there's an ethical thing there where if the animal can't consent, is it fair to expand their lifespan longer than is natural?
We already do that by having pets.
Yeah.
That's true. But it is an interesting point to bring in because...
Like, would it be fair to make a dog live for 30, 40, 50, 60 years?
Yeah, and it's very hard. I mean, you can kind of get the consent from a dog because it's a social species and it can convey whether or not it's happy and whatnot. And, it might be this depressed dog. You get some humans that just unfortunately are depressed.
Yeah.
It might just be one of those things. But it is a good question to ask.
His dog just gets to like 80 years old and then steps in front of a bus.
Oh.
Well, yeah, why not?
But a couple things that we need in order to have, extend human lifespans and potentially, cheat death or at least live healthy until the very end, we need to have a mindset shift. We need to have a mindset shift towards a post-scarcity world of abundance, towards... this mindset of there are loads of other planets to colonize and populate. This is not the only planet in existence. Why are we still just on this one? And also this mindset shift towards, when you think of there's Werner syndrome basically causes premature aging due to heterochromatin loss. And people see this as barbaric. They see it as horrible and horrific that someone is, cheated out of all these years of their life. Why not look at...
We do definitely value youth. Definitely.
Why not look at 100-year lifespan the same way? Why not look at it as this is absolutely horrific that all of these people are dying of, cancer and organ failure and all these horrific things. And why? I think that, 100 years ago, we're going to see this as absolutely horrific that this happens. So this general acceptance of death, like it needs to change. We need to view death as a disease that needs to be cured.
I don't know if I agree with you. I think part of humanity's biggest problem is the hubris that we think we should live forever. I think part of the greatest step that humanity has to make, and lots of humans have made it, but we haven't made it as a culture, as an identity, is to accept that death is just part of life and that it's a thing that we should take and just be at one with. It's fine. But then I don't mean that as
a die on your terms.
Yeah, so I don't mean that as a sentiment to say that because I think like that we shouldn't proceed forward with increasing how long we can live. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that I think there is a philosophy to be had with how to live the good life and how to, more importantly perhaps, die in the right way. No one wants to suffer. I don't want anyone to suffer. But even at my age now, I strongly suspect that I just would not want to live forever. This is from a gap
I would probably rephrase it to, rather than viewing, death as something that, we can all live forever or something. I would rather say the acceptance of aging is barbaric, because I want to be healthy until the very end. And people say, but getting old and dying, like that's what gives your life meaning. And it's like, that's like saying that, when you go and you're staring out over the Grand Canyon, that the fact that you don't have cancer is what gives your life meaning. It's like, no, it's not all of the suffering and these horrific barbaric things that happen to us that make this moment special and wonderful. Your moment holding your kids or your pets or your significant other, like it's the wonderful things of life that, that are meaningful. So
Actually,
we're grateful that we have health.
That's something else I was going to throw out there. If we can extend like health and lifespan, what about extending the time period to have kids?
Yeah.
Why does menopause have to be around 50?
Yeah,
potentially. Sure. That's a whole nother area. And then, then you start getting more into the overpopulation thing. But I want to kind of end on the question of like, what can you do right now? So like, if you want to live longer, you want to live healthier, there's a few things that you can do. Are there any that you guys can think of off the top of your heads?
The main, it doesn't really answer your question, but just being able to embrace death for what it is very hard. But when you do it, it completely changes your outlook on it, changes your outlook on life in general. What me and Rachel have done in a collaboration before, we've discussed about death and dealing with it as an atheist, as somebody that's irreligious, who doesn't believe that we're going to see our loved ones again, doesn't believe that we're going to continue. Because in effect, religious people don't believe in death. A lot of them anyway, because you do continue. It's a different definition of death. It's death of the physiological body, whereas someone like myself I believe that I will return to a state equivalent to what I was in the year 1900. That is nothing at all. No suffering, nothing like that. But I know I'm not really answering your question, but I think the mentality of being able to embrace it for what it is will make you not fear it. But yeah, I mean, I guess I'm not answering your question, so I shouldn't rant too much on that one.
Well, I would like to quote Syrio Forel from Game of Thrones. There is only one God and his name is death, and there is only one thing we say to death, not today.
That's a good way of putting it.
A couple of ways that you can extend your healthy life is exercise regularly. It'll keep your mind sharp and your mind, so you can fight off certain neurodegenerative diseases. Eat healthy. There's been some evidence to show that caloric restriction can lead to increases in life expectancy.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily know. This says that, it increases in mice by 40%. And the thought process behind that is that glucose can sometimes bind to DNA, proteins and lipids, and can do damage to cells.
There's something else on top of that. So I was looking into intermittent fasting, which is similar to what you were talking about there, where you would get all of your calories in within 8 hours. Or some arbitrary number, but certainly quite small. And then you don't consume any calories. You don't give your metabolism anything to activate for the duration until you get back round to your eating box, as it were, the next 8 hours the next day. The reason for that is because it gives your metabolism a real rest. It allows it also stops your insulin from spiking, etc. There's really good evidence there to show that if you want to stop the body from breaking, giving it a rest, that is the way to do it. And that's one way in which we evolved to do it, because we didn't have access to chocolate all the time when we were on the
dark chocolate and red wine.
Exactly. We didn't have access to calories in this sense.
Yeah. On that, another thing, apparently resveratrol can help some, but people say, oh, therefore you should drink lots of red wine. It's like, well, there's not enough in a glass of red wine. And if you drink multiple glasses, you start running other health risks. But there are supplements I think you can take. One of the big things, though, is, if you can invest in research and development, if you can promote science and push back against this general acceptance of aging and all the sicknesses and the horrific things that come from it, then we can really start to push society forward more. And in the meantime, don't die of anything stupid. So my conclusion is basically we may not live forever, but there's no reason that we should age until we die.
Okay.
That's fair. Yeah.
And I want to end on the quote by Horace Mann, "Be ashamed to die until you have scored some victory for humanity."
Aww.
Next week, we will have Rachel weighing in on the topic of whatever Rachel is.
But I don't have a topic
She's still
yet.
deciding. And till then, we don't have a tagline.
No, we do not.
I think our tagline should be
We don't have a tagline.
Well, yeah. What was the one about? Don't die stupid, or don't
die of anything stupid.
Don't die of anything stupid. That. There we go.
All right. Later, guys. This has been an absolute blast, and now we want you to join in the conversation over on the Here and How Facebook and Twitter pages, or follow us on Pinterest and Instagram if you just want some of the dankest of sciencey memes. If you like one of our particular styles, check out each of our YouTube channels: Rachel Oates, Rationality Rules by Stephen Woodford, and Holy Kool-Aid by me, Thomas Westbrook. To find all of our episodes, show notes, contact information, and more, warp on over to our home base, thehereandhow.com. If you enjoyed this episode and want us to succeed in spreading the love of science, you can help us out by giving us a 5-star review on iTunes or Stitcher. And to all our friends and family listening, thank you for spending this episode with us. We'll be back to explore another exciting big idea next week. Now go create something magnificent.